All right, guys, this time we are still looking at rational numbers, but we are dealing with decimals today. And we're just multiplying and dividing decimals. We'll deal with the other part of decimals next week. All right, so when you're multiplying and dividing decimals, one thing you need to remember, we're going to start with multiplying. When you're multiplying decimals, number one, you do not, I repeat, you do not have to line up the decimals. In fact, if you do, it'll just make your life 10 times harder. Okay, so you do not have to line up the decimals. You do, however, have to count the numbers that you see behind the decimal in both numbers. Okay, you do have to add the numbers. You do have to count the numbers that you see behind the decimal. Okay, so let's say that I give you 4.32 and I give you 6.217. So what I'm talking about is the numbers that you see behind the decimal. So right here's the decimal. What does behind mean? Behind means anything back here. So anything behind the decimal. So you've got 2 here. Here's the decimal here. So anything behind the decimal. So there's 3 there. So those are the ones that we're looking at. When I say you're counting the numbers that you see behind the decimal, that is what I'm talking about. Okay? So that's what we're talking about when I say behind the decimal. All right, so keep that in mind. So you don't have to line up the decimals, but you do have to count the numbers behind the decimal. And we will talk about why in just a minute, because we're getting ready to do some examples. All righty. So let's say example number 1. I give you negative 2.3 times 4.12. Okay, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set it up. So I'm going to say, all right, I got 4.12 and I got negative, let's put the multiplication sign, negative 2.3. Notice I didn't line up my decimals. I like to try to line up my numbers instead. Okay, so now I don't care about where the decimal is right now. What I care about is those numbers behind the decimal. So right here, I have a 1 and I have a 2. So that's 2 numbers behind the decimal there. I have a 3 right here, so that's a 1. That's 1 number behind the decimal. Oh, there's that glare again. So all together, I have 3 numbers that are behind the decimal. We're going to use that at the end, so we'll come back to that, okay? So we'll come back to that in just a minute. So now we're going to do our multiplication. So 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 4 is 12. Now I'm done with the 3. You need to put a placeholder. I always use an X because that's how I was taught growing up. I know a lot of people use a 0. You use whatever you want to use, but you have to put a placeholder right here because we don't ever put another number under that first number. So now we move to the 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 4 is 8. And we're going to add these numbers. 6 and nothing is 6. 3 and 4 is 7. 2 and 2 is 4. 1 and 8 is 9. Now, before I worry about my decimal places, I need to worry about my sign rules. And this is another one of those times, if we were in class, I would go, sign rule. I have a positive. I have a negative. My signs are different. So my answer is always negative because I'm talking about multiplication and division. Now I'm going to worry about my decimal places. I told you we would come back to this 3. I have 3 decimal places, which means right now my decimal is sitting right here. It can't stay there though, because I have 3 numbers that have to be behind it, because that's what this tells me right here. 2 from the top and 1 from the bottom, so 3 total. So I'm going to take this decimal place and I'm going to move it 3 spaces to the left. So my final answer is negative 9.476. Okay? So make sure you take into account all the little pieces that we have to do. The last thing you do is you take care of those decimal places. That's why if I were you, I would write them out here beside it so I don't forget about them. You don't know how many students I've had, they leave it like this because they forgot to worry about their decimal places. So get in a habit of writing it out beside it so that you have it as a reference. Because if you look up and you're like, what is that there for? Oh, yeah, my decimal places. Oh, I forgot. And you can go back and fix it. Okay? So that's our first example. I hope everybody has it. You can always pause the video and get it written down. And then move it on to the next part. All right, let's do another one. Example number 2. Negative 10.13 times negative 0.74. All right, so I have negative 10.13 times negative 0.74. Okay, before I do anything, I'm looking at my decimal places because I don't want to forget about them. Here's 1 after, here's 2 after. So I've got 2 here. Here's 1 after the decimal, 2 after the decimal. So I've got 2 here. So all together, I'm looking at 4 decimal places at the end. Now I'm going to do my multiplication. 4 times 3 is 12. Carry that 1. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 4 times 0 is 0. 4 times 1 is 4. Don't forget your placeholder. 7 times 3 is, that 4 is done. 7 times 3 is 21, so drop your 1, carry your 2. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 2 is 9. 7 times 0 is 0. 7 times 1 is 7. And I'm going to add 2 plus nothing is 2. 5 plus 1 is 6. 0 plus 9 is 9. 4 plus 0 is 4. And then you have your 7. Now, I have a negative times a negative when we're talking about multiplication. If your signs are the same, your answer is always positive. So the last thing I have to worry about are my decimal places. Right here, I have a total of 4 decimal places. So remember, your decimal starts at the end. I'm going to move it 4 times to the left. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So my final answer is 7.4962. And because both of these are negative, when I multiply it, it gives me a positive. And that would be your answer. Don't let the decimals scare you. If you follow the steps, they are not that bad. But you have to follow the steps and you have to make sure that you complete each step. Okay? So that's multiplying decimals. Now we're going to look at dividing decimals. All right. Okay, when you're dividing decimals, one key thing that you have to remember is you must always move the decimal to the very back of the number that you are dividing by. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that, okay? So you must always move the decimal to the very back of the number that you are dividing by. Now, with that, however many times you move it, oh my goodness, I can't spell tonight. However many times you move it in one number, you must move it the same amount of times in the other. Okay? So, Miss Long, what do you mean? I'm so glad you asked. You're such a good class. You always want to know things. All right. So, if I were to give you this, if I said 54.20 divided by 1.5. All right, so what this means up here, this very first one, you must always move the decimal to the very back of the number that you are dividing by. That means this number right here, I'm dividing by 1.5. That decimal can't be in the middle of the number. It has to move to the back. So I'm going to have to take this decimal and I'm going to have to move it back here. However many times I have to move it for it to be at the back is how many times I have to move this one as well. So I move this one time, so I have to move this one time. So this means that now I have 15 and I have 542.0. Once you've moved your decimals, you can then pull your decimal straight up from where it was. Straight up the stairs. It lines straight up. Okay? Now I can do my division. How many times does 15 go into 54? I know, oh, Ms. Long, that's a big number. I know. You got to know your multiplication tables, though. But it goes 3 times. 15 times 3 is 45. When you do your subtraction, I'm going to move my camera so we can catch it all. When you do your subtraction, I'm going to borrow from here. That gives me a 4. That's a 14. 14 minus 5 is 9. Then bring your 2 down. How many times does 15 go into 92? See, I can't get anybody to tell me because I can't hear you. All right. If you're not sure, then go through a couple things. I know that 15 times 4 is 60. Well, I know that's not close enough. And if you do 15 times 8, well, that's 120. So that's too much. So let's try 6. It's kind of in the middle, right? So 15 times 6 would be 90. So there you go. So it goes 6 times, which is 90. Subtract that. That gives me a 2. You're going to bring that 20 down. Or that 0, I mean. So now we have 20. Whoop. How many times does 15 go into 20? It goes 1 time. Now that leaves me with 5. Anytime you've got something left, we want to try to take it out until we don't have anything left. So what you can do is you can add a 0. You can always add zeros. It's okay. And you can bring that 0 down. Well, how many times does 15 go into 50? It goes 3 times. And it's going to give me 45. And guess what? I'm going to get 5 left over. And it's going to keep giving me 5. So I don't know how many of you remember, but there's this little thing you can put. It's a bar. And that means that 3 is going to keep going over and over and over and over again. So your answer is 36.13, and that 3 is repeating. That's what that little mark means. Okay? So 54.20 divided by 1.5 is 36.13 repeating. Okay? All right, we're going to do one more. We'll see if Miss Long can make it end pretty, which no promises, because I just make these up off the top of my head. Sometimes they work out pretty, sometimes they work out like that one, but that's okay, because then you know what to do if you get one of those, right? Great. All right, so example number 2. Let's say, we'll do a little bit smaller. We'll say we have 20.2 divided by 0.10. All right. Now remember, whatever you're dividing by, it cannot have that decimal. Oh, you can't even see it. Sorry about that. Okay, so 20.2 divided by 0.10. You cannot leave this decimal in the front. It has to be in the back. So, how many times do I have to move it? 1, 2. So now it's the 10. However many times I move it here, I have to move it that many times here. So 1, 2. Now guess what? There's nothing here. So what do I put in its place? What can I always put in something's place and it not change it? A 0. So now I have 10. And then I have 20, 20. Ooh, 2020 has not been a very good year, has it? I did not do that on purpose. I am very sorry. Maybe this one will work out better than 2020's worked out for everybody else. All right, bring your decimal straight up. How many times does 10 go into 20? Twice. We're going to subtract 20. Gives me a 0. Bring down a 2. How many times does 10 go into 2? Last time I checked, 10 didn't go into 2 because 10 is bigger than 2. So you have to put that 0 there. Okay, so 0, have a 2, bring down a 0. Now, how many times does 10 go into 20? 2. So 20.2 divided by 0.10 is 202. And that's your answer. Okay? So as long as you remember to move that decimal, then division is no different than it's always been. All right? So that's all for this week. You've got your MOL. So good luck. Make sure you read the questions carefully. I tried to trip you up a little bit. See you next week. Have a good weekend.